Hey everyone. Welcome to the third part of my video course. I'm going to teach you about some advanced settings that you may not have heard of and clear up a few things about settings that you may be unsure about. So let's start over here. So we're at the basic tab of Cura. This is the software I use. It's called Cura. It's made by a company called Ultimaker, and I highly recommend it. It's free software and it's great. I'll be teaching the course on this software. So, layer height. You should know this. The thicker, the stronger the print is, the thinner the layer height, the more accurate your print is. Shell thickness. This is the thickness of the outside of the print. So if you have a fill density of 20%, which means that this object right here, the inside isn't solid, which means that the edges of the object have a wall. And I'll show you an example of this. I'll put up a picture and I'll edit it in. Should be somewhere around here. But uh, that is what it looks like. And the stronger the wall, the better. But obviously you don't want to use too much material, so I just leave it at 0.8 and it seems to do fine. Enable retraction. This just lets the nozzle push filament back out of the extruder to prevent little defects in your print. Fill density, top and bottom thickness. This is the same exact thing as shell thickness, except it's the top and bottom, not an outer wall. And fill density, this is how solid your object is. I usually use it leave it at 20. If you want a stronger object, you can put it at 100, but I usually do fine with 20. Speed and temperature. So speed's a funny thing. If you buy a really cheap printer, then you can crank the speed up as far as you want, but your print quality isn't going to be very good. So it depends on the printer. You'll have to test it out with your own to see the optimal speed. But I usually leave it around 40 to 60 millimeters a second, and that does okay for my printer. Printing temperature. You should know this. PLA 110, ABS 230 says it right there. Bed temperature. I usually print with PLA at a temperature of 60 and ABS at a temperature of 80. The temperature of 80 will just keep it from warping. So support. Touching build plate and everywhere are your two options. Basically, if you have any overhangs on your print, touching build plate obviously will only touch the build plate, where everywhere it will touch other places on your print. So you just have to decide that by looking at your model. There's no easy way of determining what you want. Platform adhesion. So I recommend using a brim if you ever have small objects, like many small objects to print. And what this will do is it will keep it from popping off the print bed when the extruder sweeps over it. And a raft achieves a similar effect, except it's much thicker and uses more material, but it can do a better job, and it's easier to take off. So filament, you should know this, the diameter, and the flow ratio. So the thinner, or the less the flow ratio, the thinner your print will be, and it will be flaky and falling apart if the flow percentage is too low, and it will cause other problems like defects if it's too high. So you just want to test out what is the optimal flow ratio for you. I'm going to put a picture up here of what a low flow ratio looks like, that's flaky and falls apart. So now let's go to advanced settings. Nozzle size, you should know this. It's basically the width of the nozzle of your printer. Retraction, I usually leave these be. Um, that just determines how fast the filament is pulled back up when it needs to be. So quality, this determines the layer thickness at the first layer. So sometimes you want a stronger first layer because it sets up the rest of the print for success. You can adjust that here. You can also make it whiter, and you can cut off the bottom object if, say, you don't have a flat object. So I'll do 5 and see how it puts it under about 5 millimeters. But I usually don't use that. I've never used it. In dual extrusion overlap, I will not be teaching you this because I've never used a dual extruder 3D printer before. Only single extruder. So, travel speed. This can be set pretty high. I just leave it at the default, and I have no problems. If you want to tweak your travel speed, you can to achieve faster prints. But 150 is pretty good. Bottom layer speed. So you always want to print your bottom layer slower than your other layers because it will get you a better quality first layer, which will make your overall print much better. Infill speed, all these are at 0, but infill speed, top and bottom speed, outer shell speed, inner shell speed, you can set these to be specific, but right now it's just at the default of 0 because the overall printing speed is at 40 millimeters a second. And cooling, so I'm going to skip over this setting. Basically, it just lets your layer cool, and it gives you an amount of seconds to let it cool. That's not that important. You can leave it at default. This one is very important though. Enable cooling fan. If you're ever printing with ABS material, you're going to want to add millimeters. So, for example, 15 millimeters. What this will do is it will only turn on the fan after 15 millimeters of your print has been printed height-wise. What this does is it keeps your fan from turning on, which can promote warping until a good amount of your print is done, and this can be very useful. So plugins, you can find some plugins online. I don't ever use them. And then start and end G code. This basically tells you what your G code looks like. So I'm going to show you some of this window view. So if you right click, you can kind of turn your view around and everything. You can go to view mode. We're in normal right now, but you can look at overhang. You see the bottom is a giant overhang, but it doesn't matter because we're printing on a build plate. You can look at transparent. I don't normally find this mode useful. Same thing with X-ray, but it's there if you want to use it. And then there's layers. So this has 55 layers. So, if you want to load a new file, you just go to load model file and pick an STL file from your computer. And I'll show you a website where you can get some later. You probably already know what it is, and it's Thingiverse. But thanks for watching this video. That pretty much sums up the settings video. So you can move on to the next one or re-watch it if you didn't understand a part, and I'll see you then.